Chapter 9, A Matter of Honor and Puffed Sleeves. Anne was overdue for trouble. It had been more than a month since she put liniment in the cake. She had made some little mistakes since then, but nothing that amounted to much. Just before school opened, Diana Barry gave a party for all the girls in the class. They had a lovely tea and then went outside to play in the garden. After a while, they got bored, started looking for mischief, and decided to play daring. Daring, which had been started by the boys, was the most popular game in town. It was the cause of silliness all over the town. First, Carrie Sloane dared Ruby Gillis to climb the huge old willow tree. Ruby scampered up it, even though it had caterpillars in all the branches. Then Josie dared Jane Andrews to hop around the garden on one foot without stopping. Jane only got halfway around and had to stop. Josie teased Jane about not winning the dare. Then Anne dared Josie to walk to the top of the board fence. Josie did it easily. Next, Josie dared Anne to walk the ridgepole on top of the Barrys' kitchen roof. It was a long way off the ground. The other girls told Anne not to do it. They were afraid she would get hurt. Anne was scared, but she said she had to do it. "My honor is at stake," Anne told them. "I will walk that ridgepole or die trying." She walked toward the house. There was a ladder leaning against the kitchen roof. Anne climbed up to the roof and balanced herself on the ridgepole. She took several careful steps, but then she lost her balance. She slid down the roof and crashed into the vines below. The girls shrieked and rushed to Anne. She was lying still and limp in the vines. Her face was very white. Mrs. Barry came running out of the house. She heard the clatter and wanted to know what had happened. Anne tried to get up, but fell down with a cry of pain. "What's the matter? Where have you hurt yourself?" asked Mrs. Barry. "My ankle," said Anne. "Oh, Diana, please go find your father and ask him to take me home." Mr. Barry carried Anne home in his arms. She was as limp as a rag doll. Mrs. Barry walked beside him. The little girls came after. Marilla was scared when she saw them coming and rushed to meet them. "Mr. Barry, what happened to her?" Marilla cried out. "Don't be scared, Marilla." Anne lifted her head and answered. "I fell off the roof. I think I sprained my ankle." "Bring her in here, Mr. Barry, and lay her on the sofa," Marilla said. "Mercy me, she's fainted." It was true. Anne had fainted from the pain. Matthew went for the doctor, who came and examined Anne. He told them that her ankle was broken. That night, Marilla tucked a very sorry little girl into bed. "Don't be cross with me, Marilla. It hurt dreadfully to have my ankle set. I'll be laid up for 6 or 7 weeks, and I'll miss the first day of school with the new lady teacher. And everybody will get ahead of me in class." There. I'm not angry," said Marilla. "You're an unlucky child. There's no doubt about it. Here now, try and eat some supper." Anne had lots of visitors in the 7 weeks that followed. "Everybody has been so kind, Marilla," sighed Anne. It was the first day she could walk again. "There's only one good thing about being hurt. You find out how many friends you have." Mrs. Allen had visited her several times, and Diana came every day. Anne told Marilla all the news from school she had learned, and all about Miss Stacy, the new teacher with curly hair and puffed sleeves. As usual, Anne talked and talked and talked. "Well, one thing is plain, Anne," said Marilla. "Your fall off the Barry roof hasn't injured your tongue at all." One cold December evening, Matthew watched Anne and her friends playing. Anne stood in the middle of the group. Matthew saw that somehow she looked different from the other girls. He couldn't say exactly how. Anne was prettier, but that was not the difference. There was something else. But what was it? It bothered Matthew all evening. He knew he could not ask Marilla. Matthew finally figured it out for himself. Anne was not dressed like the other girls. Marilla made her plain dresses with tight sleeves. That was the difference. All the other girls had puff sleeves. Their dresses were in prettier colors, too. He wondered why Marilla always kept Anne dressed so plainly. Of course, it must be all right. Marilla knew best, and Marilla was bringing her up. Still, Matthew thought it would be all right if Anne had just one pretty dress. That wouldn't be spoiling her too much, would it? Marilla wouldn't mind that, would she? A pretty dress like Diana Barry always wore? He decided that he would give her one. Christmas was only 2 weeks away. A pretty new dress would be the very thing for a present. The next evening, Matthew went to town to buy a dress. Matthew hated shopping, even for farm supplies. He was afraid of store clerks, especially lady store clerks. When he got into the store that evening and saw a lady working at the counter, he felt very, very shy. He was afraid to ask her for help picking out a dress, so he asked about rakes and seeds instead. Matthew got so confused that he went home with 20 pounds of brown sugar, but no dress. He needed a woman's help to solve the problem, Matthew decided. He couldn't ask Marilla because she might get upset. She thought Anne's plain dresses were just fine. He went to Mrs. Lynde, and she was happy to take over. She bought some nice brown fabric and made Anne a pretty dress with puff sleeves and lace trim. Mrs. Lynde brought it over to Matthew on Christmas Eve. Anne ran downstairs on Christmas morning. "Merry Christmas, Marilla. Merry Christmas, Matthew. Isn't it a lovely Christmas?" Then Anne saw Matthew. He was holding out a dress to Anne. "Oh, Matthew, is it for me?" Anne whispered. She looked at the dress quietly. "Oh, how pretty it is." It had a frilly skirt and a little ruffle of lace at the neck. But those sleeves, they were too beautiful. Big puff sleeves with bows of brown silk ribbon. Tears welled up in her gray eyes. "That's a Christmas present for you, Anne," said Matthew shyly. "Why, Anne, don't you like it?" Well now. Like it? Oh, Matthew," Anne said through her tears as she clasped her hands. "Matthew, it's perfectly exquisite. Oh, I can never thank you enough. Look at those sleeves. Oh, it seems to me this must be a happy dream." Anne got to wear her new dress to the Christmas program at school that evening. She felt so pretty, and she was so proud of her puff sleeve. It was the best Christmas she had ever had. That night, Marilla and Matthew sat by the kitchen fire after Anne had gone to bed. "Well now, I guess our Anne had a good Christmas," said Matthew proudly. "Yes, she did," admitted Marilla. "She did well in the Christmas program, and she looked real pretty in her dress, too." "Well now," Matthew went on, "she's starting to grow up. She'll be 13 in March. She'll need something more than Avonlea school one of these days." "There's time enough to think of that," said Marilla. "I guess we should send her to Queen's Academy after a spell, but not for a year or two yet." "Well now, it won't hurt to start thinking about it," said Matthew.